And so today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about conscientiousness. And so I know this is kind of weird, but like I got this question a year ago, like literally like a year ago, or maybe even over a year ago. And I know sounds bizarre, but I actually did not have an answer. So people kept on asking me, like, how do I improve my conscientiousness? So I've been working on it for like a year and trying to figure out, like reading papers on personality assessment, like reading some of these old texts on yoga and things like that. So in trying to figure out, like, okay, how can we improve conscientiousness? Is there a way to do it? So came up with a couple of theories and then tried to test them out with a couple of people over the last few years. What does it mean? I know we'll get into it. I'll explain what all that is. And so then tested it with a few people, and it turns out that it actually does kind of work, at least anecdotally. So that's what I want to kind of talk to you guys about today. So this is going to be, we're going to use, like I'm going to draw a little bit. So let's kind of dive in. Okay. So the first thing to understand is that, so when we look at different kinds of different people, we have different personalities or different kind of cognitive traits or styles. And in the East, we look at systems like Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine, which will use elements to describe what kind of person someone is. So they'll say that, like, for example, a Vata person is like a wind type. And so their mind is like the wind. So it blows hard in one direction and then like changes direction easily. So Vatas are people who get bored easily, pick things up very quickly. They can be very passionate about things for like 15 minutes and then it kind of like, isn't stable, isn't consistent. So that's sort of the Eastern system. In the Western system, there's one really good validated model of personality, and that is the 5-factor model. And so the 5-factor model basically studied people's personalities, and what they found using a technique called factor analysis is that personality tends to cluster in 5 different groups, okay? So these groups are extroversion, openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. And so what do these 5 factors mean? So extroversion is like how extroverted or introverted you are. So people who have high extroversion like tend to get relaxed with other people. They draw energy from other people. People who have low extroversion prefer to be like by themselves. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how many friends you make or how charismatic you are. It's just sort of, what you prefer. So openness is a tendency to like openness, new experiences. So you tend to be like open-minded as opposed to like a little bit more traditional. Agreeableness is like how likely you are to get along with other people and like kind of be malleable or flexible with your thinking. It doesn't mean that you're nice or mean. It just means that like you kind of, are pretty like open mind. You're willing to sort of change your views to accommodate others. And then we get to conscientiousness. So this is kind of a big thing in the gaming community because people who like, so this is the cool thing about the gaming community is that a lot of people nowadays who like read the internet are actually like amateur psychologists, which I think is fantastic. So you guys, do a lot of research. You guys read a lot of stuff on the internet. You watch educational videos. And then one of the things that comes up is this trait of conscientiousness. So conscientiousness is your ability to sort of focus on a task for extended periods of time. It also governs things like impulse control. So people with low conscientiousness tend to be impulsive and have trouble with follow through. Whereas people with high conscientiousness tend to be, like disciplined, organized, and will follow through. And so one of the interesting things is that like people tend to think that certain attributes of, certain attributes are better than others. So generally speaking, a lot of like the gaming community feels like they have low conscientiousness and therefore they like lost the lottery. Right. So if you're kind of born or nurtured in a way where your personality forms with high conscientiousness, you're actually okay doing things like delaying gratification, working hard, working towards a goal, and following through. And then there's us who's like, well, we're not good at that. I'm kind of lazy. I'm undisciplined. And so people asked me the question as we were, talking about the 5 factors, like, how do I increase my conscientiousness? So that's what today's lecture is going to be about. And the last attribute is actually neuroticism, which is your tendency to worry. So people may think that neuroticism, which is like your tendency to like suffer up here, is a bad thing. And it certainly causes suffering, but there are a lot of things that show that neuroticism is actually an adaptive trait. So people with super low neuroticism, or what I think of as like the classic pothead, like sit around all day, do nothing, like not really worry about anything. Like they don't get worried about stuff. They're just super chill. And so as a result, they don't get motivated to do things because, they don't really care about the consequences. And so, for example, doctors, or actually medical students is a better way to put it, test very high in neuroticism and very high in conscientiousness. And the reason for that is because like they were the kids that were worried about getting a B on a test when they were in college, which pushed them to study like on Friday nights instead of going to parties. And they're also kind of hardworking. So like that combination of traits is what sort of allows people to like be successful medical students or get into medical school. So it's not like high neuroticism is better than low neuroticism. And oddly enough, it's not like low conscientiousness is better than high conscientiousness. But in our society, we tend to select or reward people who have high conscientiousness. So that gets to the crux of today's lecture, which is that if I have low conscientiousness, am I SOL? Am I screwed? Or is there something that I can do to boost conscientiousness? And so people basically think if I have low conscientiousness, like, I drew the short straw in life, what can I do about it? So it took me a little while. But it actually turns out that you can improve conscientiousness, or at least I think so. And here's the best way that I've been able to kind of figure out how, okay? So let's start by thinking about what actually happens in the mindset of someone who has low conscientiousness, okay? So when we're thinking about like conscientiousness, like, so let's think about low versus high conscientiousness. So let's say that like it's a Wednesday afternoon and I'm done with my classes and I've got two choices. I can play Apex Legends, or I can study for my like test next Tuesday, right? And so in the mind of someone who has high conscientiousness, it's a little bit easier for them to study instead of like play a game. And if we think about it, like I have two impulses, right? So like one impulse is like what I want to do, and one impulse is like what I don't want to do. We're not going to say it's good for me or not good for me, because the first thing to understand is like the impulses are what I want to do and what I don't want to do. And so you kind of get distracted and you end up going towards Apex Legends, right? So if you have high conscientiousness, you choose the thing that you don't want to do. If you have low conscientiousness, you basically give in to the thing that you want to do. So you have this impulse to play a video game and you give into it. So if we kind of think about it, is there any way to train ourselves to do what we don't, or not do what we don't want to do? Is there any way to train ourselves to avoid doing the thing that we want to do? And there's kind of a subtle answer. What we really mean by that is there anything that I can do that will set myself and what I want aside? Because that's basically what we're doing, right? So if I want to play a video game, that's like prioritizing me. And like, can we set that thinking aside in favor of something else? How do we train our minds to set aside what we want in favor of like what's good for us? And so the subtle thing there is that it's not necessarily a choice between what's good for me and what I want. It's just the key act. If you look at the cognitive act, it's actually setting aside what you want, which is the important thing. It's the impulse control, which is the important thing. And so conscientiousness is associated with higher degrees of impulse control. And so the funny thing is that the answer is actually right in the word. Okay, so if we think about conscientiousness, when we think about a person who's conscientious, what does that mean? Right? So if we think about like what are the different ways in which we use that term to describe people? So the first, so people say aware, conscious. So it's not necessarily conscious, right? So it's like they think about people who are like hardworking, but when we also think about it, we think about people who are caring. Like, so if we think about a person who's like very conscientious, that person is like thoughtful about other people. And so the funny thing, there's a really simple way to boost conscientiousness, which is just to be thoughtful for other people, or to, I know it sounds kind of weird, but like to just be a nice person, to be a good person, to try to put other people first, to be selfless. And so this is really subtle because if you think about it, like when I do something for someone else, like let's say I've got like a pizza, right? And I've got like a whole pizza to myself. And if I think about it, I'm sort of like, okay, well, let me think about what I can do for someone else. I can eat the whole pizza myself, or I can share the pizza with someone else. And in that moment, I have an impulse. Let's say it's eat the pizza all by myself. And what I'm doing when I care about other people in a very like thoughtful and deliberate way is I'm setting aside my own impulses. So I want you guys to think about helping other people and how helping other people almost certainly comes at a cost to yourself, right? You have to give something up in order to help someone else. So if you share something that you have, you lose half of it. If I have a friend who's sick and I make them like, chicken noodle soup or whatever, like lentil stew, whatever, and I like bring it over there, I lose like an hour or two of my time. I can't play video games during that time. I have to go and do something for someone else. I essentially expend effort at a cost to myself for the benefit of another person. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but if you really look at what happens in the mind of someone who helps another person, there's a really, really key common element, which is the avoidance or restraining your impulse to benefit yourself. Right? So if I do anything that's nice for someone else, it has to come at a cost to me. And that's actually a really wonderful thing because that is what allows us to train conscientiousness. Okay? So let's kind of think about that. So then like the tricky thing about the personality models is that, people also look at things like empathy, right? And so they say, oh, isn't helping other people empathy? Isn't that what makes you an empathic human being? And the short answer is not really. And this is why it's there's a lot of nuance here. So empathy is the capacity to feel what someone else is feeling. And so people who are naturally empathic naturally are more helpful towards other people. That's not what we're talking about, right? So what I'm actually talking about, the best example of what I'm talking about is the altruistic sociopath. So I don't know if you guys know this, but sociopathy is another personality kind of scale. It doesn't really fit into the 5-factor model, or it maps onto the 5-factor model in its own way. It's sort of like low agreeableness, maybe a certain amount of conscientiousness. But the altruistic sociopath is actually what we're going to look at to understand this. So I don't know if you guys know this, but there are a lot of people who are really, really good people who are not empathic. They just choose to be good people. So I worked with some of these people, and a lot of times, the problem with sociopaths is that the ones that get so if you look at incarceration rates and stuff like that, sociopathy is higher in a prison population. But the tricky thing there's some evidence that suggests that the sociopaths who wind up in prison are the ones that get caught and aren't actually very good at it. And so they actually may have a lower IQ. So it is possible to have these altruistic sociopaths. And I see these a lot. So I work with a lot of C-suite executives, and these people test very highly on the sociopathy scale. I myself test highly on the sociopathy scale. Psychiatrists actually routinely test highly on the sociopathy scale. Surgeons test highly on the sociopathy scale. It's kind of strange, right? So if you think about what is it that why are psychiatrists high on the sociopathy scale? It's because, in a sense, we have a very protective or low level of empathy. And what I mean by that is that, when I'm sitting with someone with depression, I can't let that person's depression, wash over and affect me. I actually need a barrier, or it helps if, I can look at their depression, clinically without feeling sad, with them, and then feeling, helpless with them. So instead of feeling that empathic helplessness, it's actually protective for me to be insulated from that. And so if you look at an altruistic sociopath, what you see is someone who does a lot of things for other people, but also doesn't do it because of empathy. So they do it sort of cognitively, right? So what they do is up here, what they say is they wake up in the morning and they're okay, what can I do? Oh, this will be something I can do for someone else. And that's a good thing. It's not based on a feeling. It's sort of based on a cognitive process of choosing to set someone else above you. Okay? And so this is the key thing about boosting conscientiousness is people look at it and they say okay, it's hard for me to train myself to not watch YouTube and study ahead instead. I completely agree. That's really hard. It's fighting an uphill battle. The trick is to use altruism is your tool. That's going to be essentially the weights that you practice with, right? So what I want you guys to understand is that if your conscientiousness is low, do stuff for other people. Very simply, right? So in that process, what you're going to have to do is set aside parts of yourself in favor of other people. And by doing that, what you're going to train in your mind is the capacity to set aside what you want. And so, and the cool thing is, if you look at the gaming population, like, this is actually something that's really awesome about us, is that we actually are really good at helping other people. Like, you guys can get off your ass if it involves like doing something substantive for someone else. So if we look at that motivational hump that you need to get over to train your conscientiousness, once you throw someone else into the picture, it actually becomes a lot easier. So just to kind of summarize, you can absolutely train conscientiousness, and the way that you do it is by being a conscientious human being, which is to be like nice towards other people and to try to do things for them. And the really fascinating thing about this discovery is that this is not like a new idea, right? So if you really think about it, like in the Eastern or karmic religions, they talk about karma or karma. And what they say is like what goes around comes around, right? So they sort of say that if you do good things for other people, like your life will be improved. And that's really weird, right? So like if you want to assume there's some sort of like cosmic principle or God or someone who's like, you know, using omnipotence to benefit people that they deem to be good, that system sort of makes sense, but we don't really have any evidence of any of that. So let's just scrap all that sort of religious stuff. Let's try to understand, is there like an actual worldly observation that supports this theory of karma, which is that like if you do good by other people, your life will be improved. And the funny thing is that this revelation about conscientiousness is like the perfect link that explains that. Because what the theory of karma essentially discovered like thousands of years ago was that when I do things for other people, I am entraining my conscientiousness. And by doing things for other people, I'm training my mind to be more restrained. I'm training my mind to not be a victim to my own desires. I'm training my mind to be less impulsive. I am being the controller of my mind instead of the mind being the controller of me. And what they realize is that the people who consistently do things for other people will, I don't know if they put these two pieces together, but they made the observation that people who consistently do things for other people, their lives start to improve. And the reason for that is really simple. It's because as you train your conscientiousness, like you're able to study more easily. You're able to like work harder and clean and be like have better discipline and better follow. And then naturally, as a consequence of that happening, then people like start doing better in their jobs. They start doing better in their families. They start being more respected. Like there are a lot of positive things that come out of that. And so it's really kind of fascinating because like the last thing that I just kind of want to say is that it's interesting that karma is like so you specific. And what I mean by that is like how on earth in a cosmic level does me like helping a lady with her groceries improve my life? Like that doesn't make any sense. Right? There's no like cosmic energy that is going to like wrap around and get to me. Like we don't have any evidence of that. So if we look at it, how does the theory of karma work? The only way the theory of karma can work is actually through you because you're the only common element. Like if I help an old lady over here and then my life gets better over here, what's the dot that connects these two things? It's you. And so the medium of action for karma must be the individual. And once we realize that, then we realize, oh shit, like that makes perfect sense, right? Because now if we look at the medium of like how we improve our lives through helping others, it has to be through us. There has to be a change within our brain or body, but let's assume brain because that's usually what, is responsible for stuff. So there has to be a change in your brain that connects helping an old lady with her groceries with like improving your life. And I think that missing link is literally this piece of conscientiousness. So it's really fascinating because, if we look at like how to improve your life, we've got this like theory that's thousands of years old, which has sort of survived the test of time, right? So if you look at it, like there's a Darwinian effect for concepts in human history. So the concepts that tend to be like more reliable and successful will be the ones that get propagated through time. And the concepts that are like not reliable won't get propagated through time, right? So if you look at religions, for example, like Horus and Zeus aren't like any better than like, whatever god was around like, in other cultures. So there's a sense that religions will be born and die because those particular like figures don't add anything. It's some of these core concepts from religion which will actually last through time. So the theory of karma has been saying this for thousands of years, and what I think is super cool is that now that we understand personality analysis, we see this interesting link that, okay, so the conscientiousness and doing things for other people and improving your own life actually is like kind of explained through our current understanding of like validated science around personality. So at the end of the day, how do you improve your life? How do you improve your conscientiousness? How do you become a hard worker when you can't restrain your impulses and you can't do it for yourself? You recruit a certain amount of altruism. You recruit doing it for someone else. And when you do it for someone else, literally what you have to do is set aside what you want or things that benefit you or giving into your impulses for the sake of another human being. And the more you do that, you train your muscle that sets aside your impulses. And the more you train your muscle to set aside your impulses, the more conscientious you will become. The more conscientious you become, the more you will be able to study and like work and read instead of playing video games or watching YouTube or Netflix or whatever. And that's really like, it's that simple. So I've been, I put this theory together like about 6-7 months ago, and I've been piloting it with a couple of the clients that I work with, and it actually seems to be working pretty well. That when people start to put themselves like second instead of putting themselves first in their interpersonal relationships, they start to like do things like, there's one person I was working with that has a degree and hasn't had a job in 8 years. So they like finished their degree and they like never got a job. And, for a little while, they were just working on repairing their interpersonal relationships. And like now they have a job using their degree for the first time. And it's like, it's night and day for them. So here's what I'd say. Hopefully this works, but this is where you guys have to try it out, right? So like, this is where I can propose to you guys. I mean, I'm not the speaker of truth. This is just the hypothesis that I've come up with, which I feel pretty confident about because I think it's sort of supported by like Eastern theory and Western science. It's sort of anecdotally tested in like half a dozen of people. And based on my own explorations of mind and frankly, a healthy gamer. So I'm also a great example of this where I have low conscientiousness, right? So like, I suck at this stuff. I have a vata mind. And so if you think about it, what is it that keeps me motivated is like thinking about you guys. So like over the last week, I've written 31,000 words of like maybe a nonfiction book. And like what motivates me to do that instead of playing video games? It's the idea that like, oh my God, like I may die in like a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. And it would be a real pity if I spent all my time learning this stuff and like some random accident happened and like I didn't, like it's weird. Like I was like thinking about that and like I only have a limited amount of time on this earth, so I better get busy because I won't be around forever, right? And I don't mean that to be like, I don't want people to get sad and stuff. I mean, it's like, it's really like a cognitive sort of thing. This is where thankfully the sociopathy within me it's nice because I can sit with that thought like without getting overwhelmed. It's just like a real practicality, right? But it's actually thinking about you guys that motivates me to work. Like it's thinking about you guys and trying to help other human beings that restrains my conscientiousness, which is like pretty low because I'm a super vata person, right? I'm bad at follow through and all that kind of good stuff too. And so it kind of works. So I encourage you guys to test it out, right? So like try it out for yourselves and see what happens if you start putting other people first. And if you do put other people first, like notice what's happening in your mind when you do that. Notice that every time you put someone else first, you have to put yourself second. And that putting yourself second is setting aside that impulse. And so every time you do that, you're getting a little bit stronger. You're gaining a little bit of XP. You're leveling up just a tiny, well, you're not leveling up because that's like, incremental. But, you're getting XP and then like what you'll do is you'll notice a level up at some point, right? Like you'll notice that like, oh, wow, I'm actually able to like clean my room now because it's weird. I wasn't able to do that. That's a level up. I'm actually able to put together my resume. I'm actually able to apply for the job. I'm actually able to learn this extra thing that I've always wanted to learn. Like if you're a programmer and we're like, oh, I'd really like to learn this, and you never get around to it. So try and put other people first. And if it doesn't work, so Diablo the Divine has a great question. If it doesn't work, shocking. In the meantime, with your failure, you have made the world a better place. Oh shit. Sucks. If you guys want to work through some of this stuff, right? So we teach these concepts. The whole reason that we have a coaching program is so that like you can work with a coach to actually like problem solve your particular issues and kind of work through those things like with someone, and then like it tends to be pretty effective. So coaching is a great way to sort of explore like testing and improving your conscientiousness, overcoming laziness, figuring out like how to implement changes in your life and things like that. They'll also help you find a little bit about your dharma and all that kind of good stuff. Okay.